The man beyond the tree line. The first time I realized someone had been inside the house, nothing was missing. The doors were still locked. The windows were still latched. Even the coffee cup I had left in the sink was exactly where I remembered it. But the kitchen chair had been moved 3 feet away from the table and placed directly beneath the attic hatch. That was when I understood the sounds outside were not meant to scare me away. They were meant to make me look in the wrong direction. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 42 when this happened, about a year after my mother died. She had owned a small cabin outside McCall, Idaho, on 8 wooded acres near a narrow county road. It was less of a vacation home and more of a place she disappeared to whenever life became too loud. After she passed, the property went to me. I had no sentimental attachment to the cabin. I grew up in Boise and had only visited it a handful of times, but I was going through a rough stretch financially, and selling it immediately would have meant paying taxes and taking the first low offer that came along. So I moved in temporarily. The cabin was built in the late 1970s. It had dark cedar siding, a shallow metal roof, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. The nearest neighbor, an older man named Leonard Shaw, lived half a mile south through the trees. To the north was nothing but national forest. At first, the isolation felt good. I worked remotely for an insurance company, so I set up my laptop at the kitchen table. Most evenings I ate frozen dinners, watched old movies, and listened to the wind move through the pines. The first strange thing happened on my 5th night. At 1:40 in the morning, I woke to the sound of someone striking a piece of metal outside. Not banging, not hammering. One clean hit. Then silence. I sat up and listened. About 30 seconds later, it happened again. The sound came from somewhere behind the cabin, near an old propane tank that had not been used in years. I turned on the porch lights and looked through the bedroom window. Nothing moved. The next morning, I walked the property. The propane tank was rusty and half hidden by brush. I found no footprints, but the ground was hard from an early freeze. I assumed a falling branch had hit it. The next night, the sound came again at exactly 1:40. One metallic strike. A pause. Then another. This time I went outside with a flashlight and a can of bear spray. I checked the tank, the shed, and the tree line. I saw nothing, but just before I went back inside, I heard a soft whistle from deep in the woods. 2 short notes. Then nothing. That should have been enough to make me call the sheriff. Instead, I convinced myself it was a hunter or someone camping illegally. I was embarrassed by how frightened I felt. A man in his 40s does not like admitting that 2 notes in the dark can make him hurry back to the house and lock the door with both hands. The pattern continued for 4 nights. The metal sounds always began at 1:40. The whistle came afterward, sometimes from behind the shed, sometimes farther uphill. Each night, it sounded slightly closer. On the 5th morning, I drove to Leonard Shaw's place. Leonard was 73 and lived alone in a white modular home with a workshop behind it. He had known my mother for years. When I described the sounds, he stopped tightening a clamp on his workbench. "What time?" he asked. 1:40. He looked toward the open shop door. "Your mother ever mentioned that time to you?" I told him no. Leonard wiped his hands on a rag. "She used to call me when she heard noises out there. Said somebody walked around the house at night. I never found anyone." "How long ago?" "Off and on for years." He tried to sound casual, but I noticed he had stopped looking at me. Before I left, he told me to replace the back door lock. That afternoon, I did. The old lock was loose anyway. I bought a new deadbolt in town, installed it myself, and added a motion light over the back porch. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third, I woke at 1:40 to the motion light clicking on. I did not hear the metal sound. I walked into the kitchen and looked through the glass panel in the back door. The yard was empty. Then something tapped the kitchen window beside me. 3 slow taps. I spun around. No one was there, but the motion light went dark as I watched. A second later, the attic hatch above the hallway creaked. I stayed frozen for several seconds, staring up at it. The hatch was closed. I told myself old houses moved in the cold. Wood contracted, metal popped. Then I saw dust drifting down from the frame. I left the cabin and spent the rest of the night in my truck at a 24-hour gas station. The next morning, I called the Valley County Sheriff's Office. A deputy named Rachel Monroe came out around 10. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, but she took me seriously. She checked every door, window, closet, and crawl space. She climbed into the attic and found nothing except insulation, mouse droppings, and old boxes. When I told her about my mother hearing similar noises, she asked if anyone else had ever had access to the property. I mentioned Leonard. She wrote his name down. Before leaving, she advised me to install cameras and not investigate sounds alone. I bought 4 trail cameras that afternoon and mounted them around the cabin, one facing the driveway, one behind the shed, one toward the propane tank, and one near the back porch. The first night, all 4 worked. The second night, the camera by the propane tank recorded something at 1:39. The image showed a man standing between 2 trees. He was far enough away that I could not see his face. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap. His hands were at his sides. The next image, taken 5 seconds later, showed only empty woods. I called Deputy Monroe and sent her the photographs. She came back with another officer and searched the area. They found an old boot print near a creek bed, but nothing else. That evening, Leonard called me. It was the first time he had ever phoned. "You showed the sheriff those pictures?" he asked. I said yes. There was a long pause. "You should sell the place, Daniel." "Why?" "Your mother should have sold it years ago." Before I could ask what he meant, he hung up. That night, I locked myself in the bedroom with my phone and a hunting knife. I left every exterior light on. At 1:40, my phone vibrated. The camera behind the shed had detected movement. I opened the app. The image was black. Then the driveway camera sent an alert. Black again. One by one, all 4 cameras went offline. A minute later, I heard the whistle. This time it came from inside the cabin. 2 short notes from the living room. I called 911 immediately and whispered my address. While the dispatcher kept me on the line, I heard a floorboard creak outside the bedroom. Then another. Someone stopped on the other side of the door. The handle moved once, very slowly. I backed against the wall with the knife raised. A man's voice said, "Daniel, open up." "It's Leonard." I did not answer. He tried the handle again. "Your mother knew me. You know me." The dispatcher told me deputies were 6 minutes away. I shouted that police were coming. The footsteps moved away quickly. A back door slammed. By the time deputies arrived, the cabin was empty. The new deadbolt on the back door had not been forced. It had been unlocked with a key. That fact changed everything. Deputy Monroe asked Leonard to come to the station the next morning. He denied being at the cabin. He also denied having a key. But when officers searched his workshop with a warrant 2 days later, they found dozens of copied keys hanging on a pegboard. Several were labeled with last names. One said Mercer. They also found photographs of the cabin taken over many years. Some showed my mother through windows. Some showed me unloading boxes after I moved in. The worst thing they found was a small battery-powered speaker and a remote trigger device matching the metallic sound and whistle I had been hearing. Leonard had hidden the speaker inside the abandoned propane tank. But Leonard was not the man from the trail camera. The person in the photograph was his son, Eric Shaw, who had been living in an old hunting trailer several miles north of the property. Eric had a long history of burglary and stalking complaints in another county. The explanation police gave me was simple and somehow worse than anything supernatural. For years, Leonard had watched my mother. He knew she lived alone. He copied her keys, entered the cabin when she was away, and sometimes when she was asleep. After she became sick, he started telling Eric about the property. When I moved in, Eric believed the cabin contained cash, jewelry, or documents my mother had hidden. Leonard used the sounds to draw me outside while Eric searched the house. The night I saw the chair beneath the attic hatch, Eric had been looking for access to a storage area above the hallway. My mother had known someone was entering the cabin. She just never knew it was the neighbor she trusted enough to call for help. Leonard accepted a plea deal. Eric received a longer sentence after police connected him to 2 other break-ins. I sold the property 6 months later. The new owners tore down the shed, removed the propane tank, and installed a gate at the road. I have not returned. For a long time, I felt guilty for not understanding what my mother had lived with. I used to think she stayed at that cabin because she loved the peace. Now I wonder if she kept returning because she was trying to prove to herself that she was not afraid. The strongest memory I have is not the whistle or the voice outside my bedroom. It is Leonard standing in his workshop, telling me to change the lock. He knew it would not matter. He already had the key. The voice in the utility room. The call came from a phone number that had been disconnected for 11 years. What made it worse was that the phone was ringing from inside the house I had just entered. My name is Nathan Cole. I was 37 when this happened, and at the time I worked for a property maintenance contractor in western Pennsylvania. Most of our jobs involved bank-owned houses changing locks, photographing rooms, clearing trash, draining pipes before winter, and making sure nobody had moved in illegally. It was lonely work, but I liked that part of it. After a bad breakup and a year of living with my brother, spending 8 hours alone in empty houses felt easier than talking to people. The property was outside a town called Bellwether, about 40 minutes east of Pittsburgh. Bellwether had once been built around a glass factory, but the plant had closed years earlier. The main street still had faded signs over boarded storefronts, and half the houses on the hills looked abandoned. The work order listed the address as 14 Hollow Creek Lane. The house sat at the end of a narrow road behind an overgrown chain-link fence. It was a 2-story farmhouse with pale green siding, a collapsed carport, and a stand of leafless trees crowding the backyard. There were no neighboring homes within sight. According to the bank file, the owner had been a retired telephone lineman named Warren Bell. He had died in a nursing facility 18 months earlier. His only daughter lived in Arizona and had refused the estate. My job was simple: document the interior, remove anything of obvious value, replace the rear lock, and shut down the plumbing before the first hard freeze. I arrived a little before 9 on a gray Tuesday morning. The front door opened with the key from the lockbox. Inside, the house smelled like cold dust, old carpet, and something electrical like the air near a burned outlet. The living room was mostly empty. A floral couch remained against one wall, along with a wooden television cabinet and a stack of local newspapers tied with twine. The papers were all from the same month, but from different years. That was unusual, but old homes are full of strange collections. I started my walkthrough with my company tablet, taking pictures of each room. The kitchen looked untouched. Plates sat in the drying rack. A calendar still hung beside the refrigerator, frozen on March of 2011. Every date after the 17th had been crossed out with a black marker. Beside the pantry was a beige wall phone. Not an antique rotary phone, just an ordinary push-button phone from the 1980s, with a long cord and a small red light near the keypad. The phone rang while I was photographing the sink. I jumped badly enough to drop my measuring tape. The ring was loud and mechanical, filling the empty kitchen. I stared at it for 3 rings before picking up. Hello? There was static, then a faint click. A man whispered, "You came alone." The line went dead. I stood there with the receiver against my ear, listening to silence. My first thought was that one of the guys from the office was messing with me. We pulled pranks sometimes, especially on new employees. But nobody knew which property I had taken until that morning, and the office line was 40 miles away. I checked my cell phone, no service. I followed the phone cord to a jack near the pantry. The line looked old but intact. That did not mean it worked. Many abandoned houses still had physical wiring even after service was canceled. I hung up and continued working. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms. 2 were empty. The third had been used as an office. Metal shelves covered one wall, filled with binders labeled by street names. Most of the names were from Bellwether and the surrounding county. Inside, the binders were handwritten notes. Some pages listed addresses, dates, and names. Others contained short observations. Kitchen light on after midnight. Blue sedan. Female driver. Dog removed. Back door still sticks. At first, I assumed Warren Bell had kept work records from his years with the phone company. But the dates continued long after his retirement. The most recent note was from only 2 years earlier. I took pictures of several pages for the bank report. While I was doing that, I heard footsteps downstairs. Three slow steps across the kitchen floor. Then nothing. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. I went downstairs carrying a pry bar from my tool bag. The kitchen was empty, but the wall phone's red light was glowing. It had not been on before. I pressed the button beneath it. A recorded voice said, "One new message." Then came the same man's whisper, "Do not open the utility room." The message ended. I looked toward the hallway. At the back of the house, just beyond the stairs, was a narrow door I had assumed led to a closet. The work order mentioned a utility room with the furnace and water shutoff. That was the room I still needed to inspect. I called my supervisor, but the call would not connect. For a few minutes, I considered leaving. The company would complain, but I could say the property was unsafe. Then I pictured driving back to the office and explaining that a dead phone had scared me out of a house. Pride has probably put more people in danger than curiosity ever has. I opened the utility room door. A set of wooden stairs descended into a low concrete basement. The air smelled damp and metallic. My flashlight swept over the furnace, a rusted water heater, and stacks of plastic storage bins. Nothing moved. I found the main shutoff valve and photographed it. Then I noticed a newer wire running along the basement ceiling. It was not part of the original house wiring. The cable had been stapled in place recently and disappeared behind a plywood panel near the furnace. I removed 2 screws with my drill. Behind the panel was a small electronic box, a cellular signal booster, and several split phone lines. Someone had kept the house phone active through a hidden mobile connection. There was also a digital recorder. I pressed play. At first I heard room noise, then my own voice from less than an hour earlier. "Hello?" After that came the whisper, "You came alone." The message had not been live. It had been triggered. A motion sensor was mounted above the basement stairs. I felt a wave of relief followed almost immediately by something worse. A recorded prank explained the calls, but not who had installed the equipment or why it was still working after the owner had died. I unplugged the box. The basement lights went out. My flashlight remained on, but somewhere above me a door slammed. Then I heard a man walking across the kitchen. Not a recording this time. The floorboards bent under real weight. I backed against the furnace and called 911. One bar appeared long enough for the call to connect. I whispered the address and told the dispatcher someone was inside the house. The footsteps stopped at the top of the basement stairs. A man said, "You should have listened to the message." His voice was different from the recording. Older, rougher. I held the pry bar in both hands. The basement door opened a few inches, blocking the daylight from the hallway. I shouted that police were coming. The door closed again. I heard hurried steps. Then the rear door bang against the wall. By the time deputies arrived 12 minutes later, whoever had been inside was gone. They found fresh mud on the kitchen floor and a pry mark beside the rear lock. Outside, tire tracks led from the edge of the woods to an abandoned logging road behind the property. One deputy searched the basement equipment while another looked through the binders upstairs. That was when they found a folder with my company's name on it. Inside were photocopies of work orders from several property contractors, including mine. The forms listed addresses, scheduled dates, and employee initials. Someone had been tracking which vacant houses would be visited and when. The sheriff's office contacted our company. 2 months earlier, a subcontractor named Calvin Reese had been fired for stealing copper wire and appliances from foreclosed homes. Calvin had worked in Bellwether and had access to our scheduling system. He also happened to be Warren Bell's nephew. Police found him 3 days later in a trailer outside town. The equipment in the basement belonged to him. The explanation was straightforward. Calvin had been using the abandoned house as a staging point for burglaries. The binders contained notes on empty properties, security habits, and when contractors visited. The phone messages were meant to scare workers away before they inspected the basement. If someone ignored the warning, Calvin watched from the woods and entered through the rear door to pressure them into leaving. The strongest part of his system was that it seemed supernatural at first. Most people would rather tell a supervisor a house felt unsafe than admit they had been frightened by a disconnected phone. The police connected Calvin to at least 7 thefts. They also found a small hidden camera above the utility room door, aimed directly at the stairs. That meant he had watched me descend into the basement. He knew exactly when I found the equipment. I left property preservation work less than a month later. The house on Hollow Creek Lane was eventually sold and demolished. A convenience store now stands near the road, though the old tree line remains behind it. I still think about the first message sometimes. "You came alone." At the time, I believed it was meant to frighten me. Later, the detective handling the case told me something that changed how I understood it. The recording had 2 versions stored in the device. One said, "You came alone." The other said, "There are 2 of you." The system selected the message based on how many people crossed the motion sensor at the front entrance. Calvin had not simply hoped someone would be alone. He had built the house to know. The booth near the exit. The first time I saw the older couple, they were sitting in a booth our staff had stopped using months earlier. That booth was beside a side exit that no longer opened from the outside. The lock had been replaced after an attempted break-in, and we usually kept the table stacked with extra menus so customers would choose somewhere else. That night, the menus were gone. The couple sat there without coats, without drinks, and without speaking. Both of them were watching me. This happened 3 years ago, when I was 39 and working evenings at a family-owned steakhouse outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The place was called Miller's Crossing. It sat near a highway interchange between a truck stop and a budget motel, the kind of restaurant that could be empty at 5 and packed by 6:30. I had taken the job after my divorce. I was living alone in a townhouse about 15 minutes away and trying to rebuild my savings. The work was tiring, but predictable, and at that point in my life, predictability felt like a luxury. Most nights I worked behind the bar with a woman named Denise Carter. Denise was in her early 50s and had been there since the restaurant opened. She remembered customers by their drink orders, knew which regulars were cheating on their spouses, and could tell when someone was about to leave without paying before they even stood up. That is important because Denise later claimed she never saw the couple. It was a cold Thursday in November. The dinner rush had started early because freezing rain was forecast overnight. Around 7, I noticed the man first. He looked to be in his late 60s, tall and narrow, with silver hair combed flat against his head. He wore a dark suit that seemed too formal for the restaurant. The woman beside him was smaller. Her gray hair was pinned tightly behind her ears, and she wore a cream-colored blouse with a small gold brooch at the collar. Her hands were folded on the table. Neither of them had menus. I assumed a host had seated them and forgotten to tell me, so I asked Denise if she knew who was serving the booth near the exit. She glanced in that direction without really looking. "What booth?" "The old one by the side door." She was opening a bottle of beer and barely paused. "Nobody sits there." I looked again. The couple was still there. I figured Denise was distracted. The bar was crowded, and 2 servers had called out sick. I grabbed menus and walked over. As I approached, the man followed me with his eyes. The woman kept staring at the bar. "Evening," I said. "Sorry for the wait. Can I start you with something to drink?" The man did not answer. The woman slowly turned her head toward me. Up close, I noticed that neither of them looked frail. They were older, but there was something controlled about the way they sat, as if they were posing for a photograph. Then the woman smiled. "Do you close tonight?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "I'll be here until closing, yes." "What time is that?" I hesitated before telling her midnight. The man looked toward the front windows, where my car was visible under the parking lot lights. The woman asked, "Do you always leave alone?" I gave a small laugh, the kind people use when they want to make a strange conversation seem normal. "Can I get you 2 something to drink?" The man finally spoke. "Not yet." His voice was low and calm. I returned to the bar and told Denise that the couple was making me uncomfortable. This time she looked directly at the booth. Her expression did not change. "There's nobody there, Mark." I thought she was joking. Silver-haired guy in a suit, woman with the brooch. Denise stared at me for a second, then leaned closer. "You feeling okay?" When I looked back, the booth was empty. The menus I had carried over were lying neatly in the center of the table. For the rest of the shift, I kept checking the dining room. I told myself the couple had left while I was speaking to Denise. The side door was beside their booth, but it had an alarm bar and could only be opened from inside. If they had used it, the alarm should have sounded. At 10:30, the freezing rain started. Customers left early, and by 11:15 only 2 truck drivers remained at the bar. That was when I noticed the woman again. She was standing in the short hallway near the restrooms. She was not using the restroom or waiting for anyone. She was standing with both hands at her sides, watching me from about 30 feet away. I blinked, and she stepped backward out of sight. I told Denise I was going to check the hallway. She grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were cold. "Don't." The word came out too quickly. I stared at her. "Why not?" She released me and forced a smile. Wet floor. Julio just mopped. I could see the hallway from where I stood. The floor was dry. That was the moment I stopped believing Denise had simply missed the couple. I walked to the hallway anyway. The restrooms were empty. The office door was locked. At the end of the corridor was a small employee exit leading to the dumpsters. That door was slightly open. Cold air moved through the gap. I closed it and checked the push bar. Someone had wedged a folded matchbook into the frame so the latch could not catch. The matchbook came from the motel next door. I showed it to Denise. She became irritated instead of concerned. People prop that door open all the time. No, they don't. She shrugged and began counting the register. I considered calling the manager, but he lived 40 minutes away and had a habit of treating every problem as an inconvenience. I removed the matchbook, locked the door with the deadbolt, and stayed behind the bar until the last customers left. At 11:50, Denise said she had a headache and wanted to leave early. That had never happened before. We always closed together. I reminded her that company policy required 2 employees to remain until the deposit was sealed. She snapped, then called Tom. Tom was the dishwasher. He had already left. Denise put on her coat, grabbed her purse, and walked out without another word. Through the front window, I watched her cross the parking lot. Instead of going directly to her car, she stopped beside a dark minivan parked near the motel. The van's headlights were off. She stood at the driver's window for several seconds. Then she continued to her car and drove away. I locked the front door immediately. My hands had started to shake, but I was still trying to explain everything in ordinary terms. Maybe Denise knew the couple. Maybe they were relatives. Maybe there was some embarrassing personal situation she did not want to discuss. I finished closing as fast as I could. At 12:10, I carried the deposit bag into the office and checked the security monitor. The system showed 4 camera views: front entrance, bar, kitchen, and parking lot. The parking lot camera was black. The timestamp had frozen at 11:47 p.m., 3 minutes before Denise left. I called her. She did not answer. I called the manager and told him someone had tampered with a rear door and the outdoor camera. He sounded half asleep and told me to call the police if I felt unsafe. Before I could dial, the office phone rang. It was an internal line. The display showed extension 4. Extension 4 belonged to the host, stand near the front entrance. I answered without speaking. For a few seconds, I heard only the soft hum of the building. Then the older woman said, "You should have left with Denise." The call ended. I locked the office door and called 911. While I waited, I watched the remaining camera feeds. The dining room was empty. The kitchen was empty. Then a figure crossed the bar camera. It was the older man. He moved slowly behind the counter, looking at the shelves as though he had all the time in the world. I told the dispatcher someone was inside. The man stopped beneath the camera and looked directly into it. Then the screen went black. I heard a metallic sound outside the office. Someone testing the handle. Once. Twice. Then the woman's voice came through the door. "Mark, we only want to talk." I backed against the filing cabinet and held a heavy 3-hole punch in both hands because it was the closest thing I had to a weapon. The door handle moved again. A man's voice said, "The police are not coming for you." Almost immediately, I heard sirens in the distance. The voices stopped. Footsteps moved quickly down the hall. A rear door slammed, followed by the sound of an engine starting behind the building. Police arrived less than 2 minutes later. They searched the restaurant and the area around the motel. The couple and the minivan were gone. The officers found the employee exit open again. The lock had been damaged from the outside with a thin pry tool. They also found that the parking lot camera cable had been cut. What they found beneath my car made the situation much worse. A small magnetic GPS tracker had been attached behind the rear bumper. One of the officers asked whether anyone at work knew where I lived. what time I usually left, or whether I lived alone. Denise knew all three. She did not come to work the next day. When the manager finally reached her, she said she was sick. 2 days later, she resigned by text and stopped answering everyone. The police questioned her, but as far as I know, they never charged her. She claimed she had spoken to a stranded motorist in the minivan and had no idea who the couple was. The restaurant's old camera system did not record continuously. It saved short clips only when motion sensors activated, and several files from that night had been deleted using the manager password. Denise had that password. A detective later told me the couple may have been part of a burglary crew that targeted service workers. The older pair would study routines and ask harmless-sounding questions. Someone inside the workplace would provide addresses, schedules, and information about who lived alone. The tracker suggested they planned to follow me home. What they intended to do after that, nobody could tell me. The restaurant replaced the locks and cameras. I quit a week later. Miller's Crossing closed the following year for reasons unrelated to the incident. The building is now a medical supply store. I never saw the couple again. I never spoke to Denise again either. But I still think about the way she grabbed my wrist when I started toward that hallway. For years, I believed she was trying to stop me from discovering the open door. Now I sometimes wonder whether she was trying to protect me because she had changed her mind too late. That possibility does not make me feel any better. It means the only person in the building who understood what was happening knew enough to be afraid of the people waiting for me outside. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. New true horror stories are uploaded every week. And remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that could happen to anyone.